Today we'll be talking about step 3 of translation, the team check. For me, this is one of the most important steps in achieving a high quality translation. And yet, in practice, it's often one that isn't done as well as it could be. So pay attention today. Often it's just one translator who does exegesis, understanding the source text, and making the first draft. Step 3, the team check, is time for the other translators on the team to give input into the translation. In steps 4 and 5, reviewers check and community testing, the text is only checked for clarity and naturalness by other people. They will be listening to the text, but not comparing it against other Bible versions. So step 3, the team check, is the last time before the consultant check that the translation will be checked for accuracy. Was anything added that should not be there? Anything omitted or changed? So the other translators on the team will compare the first draft against other versions and other exegetical tools to make sure the text is faithful and accurate with the original. It's a very important step. Translation takes teamwork. We may each come with a different color piece or skill to the task, but together we can accomplish more than we can individually. And besides just different translators on the team, there are others who are part of this translation task. Those who give, those who pray, those who manage, those who do scripture engagement, and many others. It takes a team. I'd like to play for you a short video clip which emphasizes the importance of teamwork. It's fun. I think you'll like it. So we can see that working as a team is better than just working alone. However, as you see here in this illustration, working as a team doesn't ensure success. We have to communicate well, we have to get along, we have to agree on where we're going and how to get there. Farming is another example where teamwork is important. Some prepare the ground. Some plant the seed. Some weed or prune. And some harvest the crops. Different skills are needed for each task. The Apostle Paul said, "I planted the seed, Apollos watered it, but God made it grow." Teamwork is also needed for translation. Some might be good at exegesis. They discover the meaning of the Bible text accurately. Maybe they've had previous Bible education, or maybe they're just really good at researching and studying the meaning of the original source text. Some speak the language well. They can express the meaning in a clear and sweet way. Have you ever noticed how some people are good in math or in music, whereas for other people those things are much more difficult? I think the same is true with language. Some are able to easily see what is clear and natural in their mother tongue and to translate in a natural way, whereas for others that might be more difficult. In Senegal, our translator there had less education than all the others on the team, but everyone recognized that he was extremely gifted in language. He could say things easily in a very clear and natural way. So he was given the job of making the first draft. And then some on the translation team are good at checking details. They can quickly see if some meaning has been added or left out. So different skills are needed to produce a good quality translation. Here is some ancient wisdom from a language group in Africa. They say, one finger cannot hold a hoe. Another group there says, one hand cannot raise a roof. The Bible says, a threefold cord cannot be broken. So working together in a team is often better, and we can do more than what we can individually. Now we know from the scriptures that God distributes different gifts to different members of the body. So I want you to take a few minutes and discuss what different gifts and skills has God given to the different members of your translation team. Now this may take some time to discover. It may be in the weeks or months ahead as you work that you find out who has skills in which areas. But I think you can start to discuss that now. Discuss how can you work together so that each one uses his gifts and skills to the full. So take a few minutes and do that now. I mentioned before the importance of the team check, but would like to emphasize that again. Remember, in the reviewer's check, step 4, and community testing, step 5, people don't compare your translated text against other Bible versions. They are just listening to the text to make sure it sounds clear, they understand it, and it sounds natural in their language. So those steps are checking for clarity and naturalness, but not accuracy. So from the initial draft until the consultant check, the only time the translation is checked for accuracy is the team check. And accuracy and faithfulness to the original source text is very important, because often little things can be left out, or the meaning can not quite reflect the meaning of the source text. The team check is the time to find those things. During the team check, the translators check the first draft for accuracy. Compare the translation bit by bit with the source text. Is there any part of the meaning which has been omitted? Does the translation add anything to the original meaning? Has the meaning been changed in any way? Check also for clarity. Is there anything in the first draft which might be ambiguous or that could be misunderstood? Is it clear who did what? Are there any figures of speech or idiomatic expressions that were translated word for word whose meaning has been lost? Is the flow of thought in the passage clear? And then check the translation for naturalness. Read or have the translation read out loud. And pay attention to places that seem strange or unnatural. Listen to how the whole passage ties together. Are the different parts well joined? In checking a first draft, each team member should compare and check the text with at least 2 other translations, one more literal and one more meaning-based. These can be in the national language, or they can be in English. Literal versions in English would be ESV or NIV, and more meaning-based versions, GNT or NLT. Notice I said that you should check the translation with at least 2 other versions. It would be better to check it against more. The more versions you compare your first draft against, the more you'll be able to see if anything was left out or added. And it might give you ideas of other ways to make the text more clear. And remember also to look at back translations in other related languages if those are available to you in Paratext, because they have already worked through some of those issues of translating hard to express ideas into a language similar to yours. Now, when questions arrive, perhaps a question of exegesis and the best interpretation to follow, or how to make a text more clear, team members should look first for answers in the following translation resource materials: Translators Notes and Translators Display. I think I've said before that for me, these 2 resources are worth their weight in gold. They have many helpful suggestions and background information. And if further help is needed, look next at Translator's Handbook and other good commentaries as available. So what kinds of things do the other translators need to check when reviewing the first draft? Are there places where something has been added or left out? Is the meaning the same as in the original? Are there places where the translation could be made easier to understand? Are there places where there's a better way to express the idea? Perhaps the first draft did a fairly good job at expressing the meaning, but you have another way that might be even better. So it's good to note that and then discuss that together in the team check. Also things like spelling and punctuation. Are they correct? You really need to check for everything. So once one translator has made the first draft, how is that then shared with the other translators for their input? Well, one possible way is to keyboard the first draft and then to print it, leaving space between the lines. Copies are given to other translators for them to write in their suggestions. Team members write down their comments. These will be discussed later with the whole translation team. Note that the other translators on the team should each individually make their own suggestions on the text. So you may need to print several copies so that each of the other translators has their own on which to make suggestions. Here's another way to share the first draft with the other translators on the team. If all the translators on the team have access to a computer, then suggestions can be made in Paratext. In Paratext, hit Insert, Note, and then when a Send Receive is done, this note that one translator has made will appear on all the computers in the team. And then the suggestions can be discussed and the notes resolved during the team check time together. Once again here, each of the translators who has not made the first draft should individually insert their own notes in Paratext in preparation for getting together as a team to discuss those. By working individually on the text and comparing it against other versions and translation reference tools, that's where you will have the most benefit and see the most good suggestions. So here is an example of inserting a note in paratext. When you hit Insert Note, a new window will open with a red flag at that spot in the text. And then you can write a note to later discuss with the other team members. So here, a note was written. Do we need to specify here the child is a male? During the team check, all the translators will be able to see that note on their computers, and then you can discuss it and make a change if necessary in order to improve the text. Now during the team check, you can click on notes marked with a red flag, and that opens a new window. And after you have discussed those notes can be resolved by clicking the Resolve button, and then the red flag will disappear because you've already discussed and taken care of that note. Sometimes you will accept the suggestion that one of the translators make if it improves the text. Other times you'll decide that the text was already okay as it was and you don't need to make a change. And that's fine. By hitting Resolve, that shows that you have now discussed that suggestion and you no longer need to have further discussion on it. Now I find that when writing down a suggestion to hopefully improve a text, it's helpful to note the source which gave you the idea. This will be helpful when supporting your suggestion to the translation team or to the consultant. So for instance, you could write bless as in G and T, or look with favor. T and display gave that idea. That way it's not just what you think that you're proposing to your teammates or the consultant, but you have a solid version or translation reference material which is supporting your suggestion. So in doing the team check, first, each translator studies the draft individually and makes their own notes on ways to improve the first draft. And then the team meets together to listen to and discuss each other's suggestions. I find this is the most difficult part of the team check for most teams. People just like to work together rather than individually alone. And so they often think, well, let's just come together and read the text and then we can see if it sounds good or not. But by doing it that way, you don't have the same amount of time to really compare each word and phrase against other versions to make sure nothing was left out or added. And you don't have the time to think about, was that really the best way to say things? So I really want to emphasize how important it is for each translator to work individually on the text in advance, comparing it against other versions, looking in the translation reference tools, and writing down suggestions to discuss with the team. Now, if there is only one computer in the project, then a computer projector can be helpful for everyone else to see the same text while doing the team check. The team makes decisions on how to revise and improve the translation. Once again, not every suggestion will be accepted as improving the translation, but many will be. And the more you do your work individually in advance, the better the quality of the suggestions will be. So in making decisions on what improves the text, suggestions should be discussed with the original translator as well as the whole translation team. Some suggestions will be accepted as improving the translation. Other suggestions will be rejected after discussion. but they may lead to another idea for a better translation. And sometimes it will be determined that the first draft is all right just as it is. So this is sort of the normal, ideal way of doing a team check. But in some cases, team checking may not work out as expected. Some translators may be afraid to correct others. Others tend to be reluctant to accept critical comments, and this can raise tension among the team members. Remember that you're working together to improve the quality of your translation. Difficult exegetical questions need to be checked with someone who understands the Bible well, or with a consultant. Make a list of points to discuss with your consultant if you have questions that you cannot resolve on your own, or by using the translation reference materials available to you. The final wording should be agreed on by the entire translation team, not by just one person. You won't always be in agreement, but after discussing things, usually you will be able to agree that a text is or is not acceptable. And then adopted changes should be keyboarded in paratext immediately, and not just written on a piece of paper to be keyboarded at some future date. Now, when discussing issues together as a team, what's not important is who made the original first draft, or who inserted a suggestion in a note. It doesn't matter the person's age, or gender, or education, or caste, or wealth. There is only one thing that is important, and that is this: does the suggestion improve the translation? Remember, translation is teamwork. Decisions are not just made by the oldest person on the team, or the one with the most Bible education, or the oldest man. The team needs to discuss suggestions no matter who they come from, and accept those which improve the text and reject those which do not improve the text. Now, in finishing the team check, once the agreed on changes for a passage have been keyboarded, it's good to read the text out loud to make sure all the changes were entered correctly. And also check again that the revised translation now flows naturally. Sometimes when changes and edits are introduced, the translation no longer reads smoothly. By reading out loud, you'll be able to hear whether or not that is the case. So in review, for step 3 of translation, the team check, how important is it? Extremely. It's the last check for accuracy before the consultant check. However, it's often the step that's most likely to be skipped or poorly done. Why? Well, sometimes other translators don't prepare their suggestions in advance. You really need to do that. Some don't like working alone, and some think they can just look at the draft during the team check. You really need to work individually in advance on preparing your notes for the team to discuss. Take the time to compare the first draft against other versions and look in the translation reference tools. Now I'd like you to do an exercise and take a few minutes and discuss the following questions. How is a team check different than a reviewer's check? What difficulties might you encounter when doing a team check? Is it better for each member to first prepare suggestions on his own, or to look at a first draft altogether? Why or why not? And how often should the team members meet for checks? For instance, some might prefer to meet every day, say at 3 o'clock. Others might prefer to meet just once a week. However, you shouldn't put the team check off too long or too much material will build up. So anyway, take a few minutes and discuss each of these questions. We're now going to talk about a different kind of team check, which I call a group team check. Now, a group team check is when translation teams from multiple languages come together to check their work. So in some cluster projects, it may be possible to do this group team check. For instance, if you have multiple teams that have all started translation at the same time and are working through the same books. Now, a group team check does not replace the individual team check. It's in addition to it. So group team checks can work if teams are working on the same passage, they live close enough to get together on a regular basis, and they share a common language of wider communication, or national language. Now, in a group team check, each team must first make a back translation of their text into the language of wider communication, or the national language. In paratext, each team's back translation is then projected onto a screen. The other teams are then able to give input and share ideas as they compare your back translation against the others and against other versions. Having a group team check one time a week in the early stages of a project can be very helpful. Here are some of the benefits of a group team check. It improves the quality of the translation. Stronger translators train weaker translators. So weaker translators can grow in their understanding of translation principles as they listen to the discussion and the suggestions made by the stronger translators. Sharing ideas across projects which have similar linguistic or cultural features is often very helpful. The solutions that will work in one language can often work in a related language. And doing a group team check motivates teams to keep to a schedule. They don't want to be left behind. Everyone needs to have the text done in order to be able to discuss it together. So it does help keep everyone on track. Now, it does take extra time for the group team check, but in early stages of projects, many new teams often find it to be worthwhile. It takes extra time because not only is there meeting together, but a back translation needs to be prepared in the national language in order to project and discuss each team's translation. And that back translation may not be in the same language that the consultant check will be in. So it does take more time, but it is often very helpful to do. So once step 3, the team check, and perhaps the group team check have been done, the translation is now ready to be tested by other speakers of the language for style and naturalness and clarity. The translation is given to reviewers for their input. We'll discuss that in step 4 of translation. And then the translation is also tested in the wider community to see whether it communicates the correct meaning to a more general audience, and that will be step 5. So at this point in this class teaching, if we were meeting in person rather than virtually, I would ask an experienced translator from a project related to yours to come and share with you for 5 minutes on his experience with the team check. So if you have the opportunity to hear from a translator in a related language, that would be very valuable to get his input on what works well and what doesn't work so well in doing the team check. So in review, step 1 of translation is doing the exegesis, understanding the source text. Step 2 is making the first draft. Step 3 is checking it together as a team to make sure it is accurate. And then step 4 will be the reviewer's check. So that's the end of this class teaching. Translation is not easy work. Understanding the original source text and making a first draft is difficult. We might think that when we get to the team check, now it will be fun. Now we get to discuss things as a team. But it is also hard work to compare that text against other versions and translation reference materials, and then to come together to decide what actually improves the text. It takes teamwork to make a good quality translation. So may the Lord bless your team today and in the days ahead as you work together on making God's Word clear and accurate in your languages. See you next time. If you're taking this training as part of a translation workshop, you'll see in the green box on the workshop schedule that we've just finished step 3 of translation, the team check. In our next class session, the box in red, you'll continue working on your translations of the Good Samaritan story in Luke 10. Now you should really be finishing up your draft at this point, because next week we will be doing the team check during the translation exercise class time. So today, when you are all done with your drafts, you should be comparing the translations that were made and choosing one that you think is the best. And then use helpful expressions from the other written drafts to improve that first draft. So that's your assignment for this next class period of time.